we have in what's called Parshat Zachor, the passage where we're taught about how to deal with Amalek in Sefer Dvarim. Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek b'derech b'tzedchem mimitzrayim. Remember what Amalek did to you by the way when you came forth out of Egypt. Asher karcha b'derech v'yizanev b'cha kol hanecheshalim achrecha v'ata ayef v'yagea v'lo yareh Elohim. How he met you by the way and struck your rear all who were feeble behind you when you were faint and weary, and he did not fear God. והיה בהניח אדוני אלוהיך לך מכל אויביך מסביב בארץ, אשר אדוני אלוהיך נותן לך נחלה לרשתה, תמחה את זכר עמלק מתחת השמיים, לא תשכח. Therefore it shall be, when the Lord your God has given you rest from all your enemies around in the land which the Lord your God gives you for an inheritance to possess, that you shall blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. You shall not forget it. Few things here. One of them, just as an aside, is that we're already in Nahash territory and serpent territory, because the text here is talking about not just the Nahash, kol haneheshalim, these feeble, but there's this weird substitution where maybe the verb is like stumbling, nechshal, with a chaf, but we have a het instead, so there's the word nahash in there, and it says vayzanev becha, that Amalek struck you at the tail. So getting back to this, talking about the serpent and the tail of the serpent, we are in the same territory and thinking about the consequences of choices and how the Nahash becomes this kind of unpredictable way in which something jumps out and bites you unexpectedly. And then that's lurking in the background of the subtext here. But I think the main point of the surface is just this. Amalek is the nation that seeks to strike where we are weakest, to massacre our vulnerable, to do so when we are weary and faint. And they do it because they have a principled objection to the existence of Am Yisrael. And that's something that has to be developed from other parts of the text of the Torah, but it's mefurash in commentaries, particularly contemporary ones, as from Rav Soloveitchik Zatzal and his father. So Amalek is the ideological enemy of the existence of Am Yisrael. It's the Nazis, it's Hamas, right? It's people who make an ideological program that is about the annihilation of Am Yisrael. And what we're being told is something very specific. It doesn't just say you have to fight Amalek. Elsewhere it says there's a war from generation to generation, midor dor, between Hashem and Amalek. But it says, V'haya v'haniach Adonai Elohecha lecha mikol oivecha misaviv ba'aretz asher Adonai Elohecha noten lecha nachala l'rishta. So when Hashem has given you rest from your enemies in the land that he's given you as an inheritance, in other words, when you're in conditions of relative peace and stability and tranquility, as, for example, when it's the case that in recent decades, Eretz Yisrael, as a result of peace treaties between Medinat Yisrael and Mitzrayim and Jordan, two different neighboring states that were at war with it, and the decrepitude of Syria, the remaining enemy, etc. All these situations, one could go into in detail, and I'm not saying anything in favor of or against the choice to make peace treaties with the Mitzrayim and Jordan, but since that was the case, the state of Israel thought of itself since the end of the Second Intifada, as it's called, as experiencing a couple decades of relative tranquility and stability that has led, among other things, to tremendous economic growth, right? And so we're talking about that kind of a situation where you're getting a bit of rest from all your enemies around. And in that exact condition, what we have here is Timhe et zecher Amalek mitachat hashamayim lo tishkach. Wipe out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Don't forget. And that, in short, is what it's clearly the case that Medinat Israel, the state of Israel, has failed to do in the last 20 years or so. Because we have had, since the foolhardy and idiotic retreat from Gaza, we have had a proto-state entity of our own creation ruled by some of our worst ideological enemies in history who openly declare their intention to murderously annihilate the entire Jewish people from the world and throw us out of the land and everything else. We've just had them living there, running the show there, and every so often also attacking us. And so concerned has been the state of Israel with the rapid reset to normal, the return to relative quiet, that we have been shochechim, right? We have forgotten. This commandment is not just, oh yeah, you have to fight these people. It's you have to erase them. You have to completely finish them off and get rid of it. Don't forget, because you will be tempted to forget, because there will be reasons why it will seem easier to forget about it, which we can see clear as day in the recent history, where, if you want to have venture capitalists flying in and out all the time, investing in startups so you can be the startup nation, then you can't have a war like the one we're now in, because that really alarms people. And it raises all these questions about the long-term future and what's going to happen. And it brings all this opprobrium from the world and everything else. What you can do is have these kind of lawn mowing operations that don't really fix the problem, that tamp things down, that leave people near Gaza, Jews near Gaza, in danger constantly and who are constantly subject to small amounts of violence that do lead to a certain amount of injury and death. And so they are sort of like little human sacrifices here and there that you make to kind of keep things on an even keel. That has been the policy of virtually everyone who's now in the current emergency government, and others who haven't yet managed to make it in as well, for more than a decade at this point. And it's been exactly this thing that has led us to this point, where we've just let the same situation fester and grow and worsen, with no leader having the resolve to take hold of the mitzvah of Mechiyat Amalek and say, this is Amalek, and we have no choice but to go all the way, as people now are talking big about. We have no choice but to get rid of this. And what we've seen is, this is where it's led. It's led to the point where we have a horrific attack occurring within the last 2 weeks here in Eretz Israel, where the depravity and viciousness of Amalek has been fully on display. And it all is comprehensible in terms of this mitzvah, meaning that on the one hand, we're being told, look, you think you're clever, right? You're the startup nation. You have all this technology. You have all this military might and superiority. You think that maybe you can build some kind of technical structure that can get around the requirements of this mitzvah. So yes, it says, but maybe you can be shocheach, maybe you can forget, as long as you just have some contraption that you build, some really fancy fence, and also some really fancy airplanes, and also this and also that, right? But the point is, this is like from the perspective of physicists, it's like trying to build a perpetual motion machine. These things like the first kind or the second kind, they have different kinds of, reasons that they can't work. But like, can you make a little contraption that if it has the right design, it just keeps spinning and spinning forever and you can harvest energy from it? There are these cool thought experiments that people come up with, early 20th century physics, where they prove things about relationship between quantum mechanics and general relativity by saying, well, unless photons change both their frequency and their energy at the same time, then you could make a perpetual motion machine in a gravitational field, blah, blah, blah. So there are these kind of no-go theorems where it's like, if you understand enough about how the pieces fit together, it's not possible to actually get the wheel to spin forever for the following reason, or you can't extract energy from it for the following reason, but you have to have the subtlety to see like what's the part where you're forgetting an assumption. And so it all operates in this way where it's like quite clever people can have to stroke their chin and think a little bit, why doesn't this work? Like, I know perpetual motion machines don't work because I know the energy is conserved and I can't just create energy, but I don't yet understand why this doesn't work. And then they think about it and they say, oh, now I get it. Because the photons are redshifted when they climb through the gravitational field and their frequency goes down, so their energy goes down, blah, blah, blah. We have this here also. We have this here looking at the Torah, where you didn't need to actually understand the mechanism if you could trust in the Torah. That if you said, okay, I have Amalek here, Amalek is sitting here on my border, in my land, I have relative peace from my other enemies. I'm very tempted to enjoy that peace, to try to flourish and prosper, and to forget about dealing with Amalek. And I think I might just have a way of doing that. I think I might be clever enough. I have the technical means. The physicist reading the Torah with emunah, so to speak, will come in and say, no, I'm sorry. You may not understand yet why this is not going to work, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling you that is not the way the world works. The way the world works is whatever technical means you have to make it possible for you to forget about Amalek and let it fester, that will fail. And when it fails, the evidence of that failure bitterly, sadly, unbearably will be like a punishment for the whole nation that we have no words for. It's so horrific. And that's where we've been led. We've been led this way by a refusal to accept a basic point about the way the world works, that at the end of the day, you don't have to simply put blind faith in. If you think about it just a little bit, you can say, oh, does it really sound to me like such a good idea to have a protostate of my worst enemies in human history just continuing to fester and persist right, walking distance from where some of my citizens are living, and assuming that my ultimately human-made, fallible, imperfect technical means will always be enough to protect me from them? You could perhaps have made an argument simply on the basis of rational skepticism that was a foolhardy course, but you didn't need to. The easy thing would be just to say, look, just the same way that a physicist will tell us, well, we have to deal with conservation of energy, so I know that your contraption is not going to work. Here we have to deal with Mehiyat Amalek and the mitzvah lo ta'aseh of lo tishkach, don't forget to finish the job with Amalek. And what that means is, no matter the contraption, no matter how clever you are, you could try 9 different ways. Each one of them would fail, possibly for a different reason and in a different way. But you're not going to beat the house, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is running the show, and he's telling you where the hard edges are, which are the constraints that you can't get around and you have to deal with and you have to face. That's where we are currently.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.